I'm Janine Gallizia and welcome to Watercolor Wednesday. What I wanted to do today is focus on trees. Two different kinds of trees, soft trees in the background and then something a little bit more precise that can actually go on top to give you a little bit of a notion of depth. Trees in the background and trees in the foreground. All right, so come and have a paint with me. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to focus on the soft edges, the softer trees that you can use in a background. Okay, so let's just work on them. So these are obviously going to be done wet in wet, meaning we're going to be wetting the sheet, having the sheet wet already, and then moving back into the paint with a wet brush. So the first thing we need is obviously some sort of a wet background. I'm going to wet this background. Let's say I'll wet it with a color, but let's actually create a little landscape. Okay, this is to do these background trees. So I won't actually draw them in because otherwise we're going to end up with that hard drawing line around them, which I don't want. But this is my horizon line. So what I'll do, I'll throw in a very basic color that can be the sky. Okay, this can represent the sky. So I want this nice and wet coming down the sheet of the paper. All right, so now that that background is wet, all I need to do is go back into that wash with something drier than what's already on the sheet. So I've got my brush in one hand, kitchen paper in another. All right, this brush is not very wet. You can see there's no drops of water coming out. I'm going to take a little bit of water just to moisten the brush. Take dry paint. I'm not picking up the water on my palette. I'm basically going into the dry paint. And from there, I'm going to just choosing a color. From there, I'm going to go straight back in to my background to create the soft edges. Now I can go back in, I can change the color. I can do basically any shape that I want. As long as my brush is a lot drier than my paper, the shape that I'm putting down will stay. All right, so this is actually quite easy, but as you see, the first stroke is usually darker because that's where we've got more paint in the brush, and the strokes after that start to become a little bit weaker. Okay, so I'm wanting to have some sort of variation in there, changing the color sometimes, making even perhaps one side darker than the other one. To do that, to do that darker value, all I need to do is pick up more pigment. I've still got the same moisture in the brush. My brush is still a lot drier than the paper, and from there, but it's actually very easy to add what could be suggested trees in the background. I can go lighter in value. Let's say I change my mind and I want to put a hill or a mountain or something in the background. I can just throw that in there. These will blend. That's the goal. They should blend. I want them to blend. Otherwise, I'd be painting on dry paper. And these nice soft edges are here. Now, this isn't watercolor paper. This is actually drawing paper. And if I find that this is still too stiff, this is where I have a bottle and I will just add a little bit extra water. By adding extra water, the colors will fuse more. Sometimes you do get these little spots. That's because the color was drying. Just move the paint around and they'll disappear. All right, so now that they're gone, the colors are fusing a little bit nicer. If I decide that I want to go back into this again, I'm going to take my kitchen paper, take away the excess water in the reserve of the brush. The reserve of the brush is down here. Obviously, that's more dense. That's where there's more space. That's where there's more denser hairs. So there's more water captured in this area. So that's where you take the water out from. You don't take it out of the tip. You take it out of the base. So from there, if I want to add some darker trees, it's just a matter of going back in, drier again. Okay. So picking up different colors, making a new color. All right. Going a little bit greener this time. That's my Windsor green down there. And I can put something new into my trees. Okay. Building up to extremely dark if I want to. That's my Windsor violet with my Windsor green. Just a little bit too dry, so I'm not picking up the colour fast enough. So let's just grab, there we go, extra paint, taking that excess water out of the brush, and there we go, darker value comes straight away. But you notice that they fuse, everything fuses in the same manner. It's because it's the same quantity of water. So I'm not actually changing the quantity of water when I'm doing this, I'm changing the quantity of the pigment. And I think a lot of people, when they're trying to paint watercolor, they think that a lighter value means more water and a darker value means less water. It's not. It's less pigment and more pigment. You keep the same dose of water because you want the same fusion. You want the same sort of nice diffused edged. All right, see how that fuses really nicely. These are my background trees. And then I'm just going to add a little foreground into that, and maybe some drier trees on the top of it. And there we have a very quick little landscape. All right, don't go back over it too much. These sort of strokes, I sort of put them in and leave them alone. If I wanted now more precision, this is where I'd move to one of my synthetic brushes. These synthetic brushes are better because they don't have a big reserve, so you don't have so much water, and you can obviously put in more smaller detail. So these sort of brushes is what I would move towards if I was looking at adding some smaller, finer detail. And let's say that maybe there's a few trees coming in the foreground. All right. They just sort of themselves are blending in with the background. This is all done on wet paper. So what I'm wanting is everything to sort of feel like it's all part of the same painting. I don't actually want to separate the trees from the background. I'm trying to make them all mixed together, which is why I'm painting them on wet paper to begin with. And you see how just with a dry line, a paintbrush that holds less water, what I'm going to get is a little bit of extra detail. All right. This is the sort of thing that you can play around with, and to be honest is a lot of fun and actually creates really good effects. So we're building up from the light wash in the background, painted on wet paper, keeping the same quantity of water, dosing the brush on the paper. And as long as your brush is always drier than your paper, you won't get a watermark. You can go back in, add detail, add some dry brush work if you want to, add more detail when it comes to perhaps branches. Maybe there's some posts, maybe there's something, some more detail somewhere. You can go back in and put them on. Just make sure your brush is always drier than your paper, and you won't have any trouble. So there you go. Very basic little scene. That's the technique, okay? Now, if I wasn't going to get that soft look, if I decided that that was not what I was looking for, so I decided I wanted to actually just put dry brushwork on the dry paper to begin with. Let's see how we can do that, okay? So let's move down the sheet. Let's move down the sheet a little bit and just do a second version. Okay, so this second version, I'm going to do exactly the same drawing so we can compare the two different finishes. One will be wet in wet and then dry paint on the wet surface, and the other one will be on a dry surface. So in that case, I can't paint the sky before because it's going to fuse. So that's kind of the opposite to what I wanted. So I will put that hill in the background. I'm going to start with that straight away. That hill, and you can see you've already got this hard edge as opposed to the soft edge. So there you're seeing the difference between a wet in wet technique, which gives you those soft edges, and when the paper is dry, basically the hard edges that you can get, which are beautiful, but maybe you need to think about where you want them to be. So let's go back in exactly in the same manner and pick up some color for the trees. All right, again, I'm taking the excess water out of my out of my brush, and just with the side of the brush, can you see that angle? It's just the side of the brush. That's what I'm painting. I'm not painting the tips of my leaves with the point of the brush. My brush, if you look at the handle, is almost parallel to the sheet of paper, and I'm literally just doing stroke after stroke after stroke. I'm not painting one stroke and going back over that stroke. It's one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, until I get the sort of look that I think is okay. This will dry faster because the paper was wet. Well, sorry, it was dry, where here it was wet, so I could go back in easily and keep playing with it. This is not the case. So I'm going to have to go in and do all the stuff that I want to while that first wash is wet, which is okay. That's not a problem. And look, it can also give you some really nice effects. But I wouldn't try and paint the two sides at once, because this is going to dry really fast. All right, so let's now do this side. Picking up again some color, dry color, not picking up the water, I'm picking up just the color, blending it well into the brush. If there is any excess water, which in this case there isn't, I'm really going to take it out of the brush. And just same thing, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke, one stroke. I'm not going back over my strokes, okay? I will fix this edge if I don't like it and make the edge a little bit more interesting, make it look like what I want it to. I need some variation. It looks flat because it's all the same tonal value. So I will go back in. Need to hurry up. In this case, I need to hurry up a little bit. That's why I prefer having the paper a little bit wet before I do this, and just add those darker values. Okay, so can you see the difference between effect? It's not quite the same look. They're both interesting. They both do have good qualities, which is why we do use both of them. Before this dries, I'm going to put in the same thing. Some of these trees, because the paper is drying, the trees will be a little bit stiffer, and I will actually wait a little bit and put some really dry edges into this little painting. All right, and that will give me an even stronger dry finish. So let's put the foreground in. Okay, I'll do it exactly the same color in exactly the same way, so that there's a lot of similarities between the two of them. It's really basically just the finish, the kind of brush work, because the kind of brush work on wet paper or on dry paper gives you that different look. So these have dried, I don't know, maybe 20 seconds or something. So I will go back into them, getting thick, dark paint. Okay, and I'm going to get some drier edges. It's not completely dry. That's when you're going to get some broken lines, which are really nice. And it does create extra texture. All right, so picking up paint, adding some smaller details, but a little bit what I was doing over here. Trying to keep the idea pretty similar so that you can compare the two of them. And the biggest difference is basically these edges are fused. They're more fused. They're more diluted in a sense. They become softer, softer and fused. Where this has more hard edges, and the hard edges actually give you a little bit more visibility, a little bit more punch to some subjects. All right, so there you go. Very similar. I think you can really see it when it comes to the way I've got the trees, the harder edge on the trees here compared to here, but also the background. Look at that difference in the background. So what I want to show you with this little video, one is two different ways of painting trees. The one is wetting the background first to get those soft edges, coming back in with a drier brush when the paper is already dry to get some harder edges. But it's really a question of mixing the two, because these soft edges are perfect when it comes to creating that background that's in the background, that stays like in the background, where this is a little bit too hard. Yet the drier brushwork is perfect to create a little bit more visibility for these trees and actually help them come forward. So there you go. Now, if you want extra help for your paintings, join me on Mondays during our Monday live session. We have a beautiful new series of images. They may look complicated. They're not as complicated as they look. Beautiful subjects. We work through them together. I explain different concepts, whether it be tonal values, composition, making things stand out, creating atmosphere, and that's actually what we're doing this week, creating atmosphere. Join us and paint live. You'll get a critique if you paint along with us. And if you can't come along, don't worry, you can just inscribe and you will get the replay, and you always keep live access to the session. All right, so if that suits you and you want to develop your paintings even more, join on Monday. Otherwise, I'll see you next Wednesday. Take care.